All right, so yeah, today is March 1st. Happy March to everybody. We're going to continue on just learning more about Django. I know yesterday was, again, probably many of your guys' first introduction to Django. So it's going to take some time to kind of get familiar with it. The way I kind of describe Django is that it's that person that you meet that seems really intimidating up initially, but then you realize that they're going to be your best friend. So that's what Django is. Django is going to be your best friend. It makes a lot of development much easier than doing it from scratch. Django, again, developers have created Django so that we can create websites fairly easily without having to kind of reinvent the wheel in terms of all the pieces that we need for getting a web server and a website up. So that's what Django is going to do for us. Again, the initial kind of stress or initial challenge is learning how to interact with Django, right? You meet a new person, you got to kind of adjust to them and see how they, how you work best with them. So Django has kind of predefined what methodology and, like, again, naming conventions, other things. We need to follow what they are expecting, and then Django will do the kind of the magic behind the scenes if we do everything correctly. So today we're going to be going through another project, kind of learning more about Django, kind of learning about file organization. I know we had a challenge last night. We usually should be going over challenge reviews because I think those are good experience. The reason not going to go over that right now is one thing. So it was not the full way we organize Django projects. So what we're going to go through today is going to kind of show you how we'll be creating projects from here on out, kind of creating more files using apps, which I don't think we introduced yesterday. But yeah, let's kind of just get into it. So if you don't want to follow along, kind of just go along these steps here. There's a lot of code snippets here, so a lot of good descriptions written up here. So if you want to follow along, definitely make sure you're going along the curriculum page. We're just going to kind of walk through this. We'll try to stick to this as much as possible. It might take a few, different directions, but overall, we're going to create a site called polls and kind of see how Django operates with this. Before we start, were there any questions about Django or anything before we get started? All right, I guess we're ready to start. So let's get this started. I'm just going to review some of the steps to get a Django project going. So let me bring up my terminal. Let me go to a different directory. Let's call this Django polls. And then I want to open that up. So Django polls. All right, so bringing up a VS Code, as we always do. And a new directory. Let's toss that over here. All right, let's make that larger. All right, so we're going to walk through the steps of initializing a Django project. Again, there's a number of steps to follow, easy to forget them. I honestly, when I was learning Django, took a pencil and paper, wrote down these steps just so I won't forget them. If I need to go back, I have my notes handy. Because there are a lot of steps, it's easy to miss one, and then things might kind of not work the way you expect it. So let's kind of go through the steps here. Again, it's on the curriculum page, but I like taking notes, especially when I'm trying to remember something. So let's say Django steps. All right, so first thing we want to do is step one, create a virtual environment. All right, so the reason we want to do this, as Raphael talked about yesterday, is we want to create like a kind of a bubble for this project so that it can use its own libraries and modules and not have to worry about what anything else on your computer is using. So again, new versions come out every now and then. Sometimes they could break, your existing functionality. Like if they take away a method you're using in your project with an upgrade, well, then your project is no longer going to work. And that's not what we want. So we want to kind of encapsulate and create a bubble for our project so that we know it's going to work no matter what else is on our system here. So that's what a virtual environment kind of accomplishes. So to do that, we want to, in our terminal, I'm just going to write $ angle brackets to denote terminal. We need to do Python-m VNV. So this is using Python module called VNV, which stands for virtual environment. And then the parameter here is the name of the virtual environment folder that you want to create. So this can be pretty much anything. You might see a few standard variations. I usually go with .vnv. That's what I've seen on the VS Code docs. You might see just VNV. Again, the naming doesn't matter too much. Just kind of be consistent, make it clear to whoever's using your project that they should know that it's a virtual environment folder. I usually go with .vnv, so that's what I'm going to go with. If you want to name it something differently, more power to you. So that's step one. I'm going to create a virtual environment in my terminal. So I'm going to type python -m vnv. I'm going to name my folder .vnv, just because that's what I'm used to. All right, so we hit enter. It's going to take maybe a hot second. And notice that a new folder got created called .vnv. This is in my project folder. This is what contains all the libraries that I'm going to use for this particular project. No other project on my machine is going to know about this virtual environment or use this virtual environment. All right, so that was step one, create a virtual environment. Step two is actually use the virtual environment. I'm not sure why these are colored weirdly, but whatever. Virtual, not make this capitalized. Use the virtual environment. Some bad typing. So to use it, we need to source it. Now, I know if you're using Windows, apologies, these commands might be slightly different. You can probably Google them and find them, but we need to get into our virtual environment directory. So it's the current path, vnv/bin/activate. If you actually go into this folder, you should be able to find the bin folder, binary folder, and find that activate script. This is what you're running effectively. Again, we don't really need to go into this, but this is what's being ran when you run source.whatever your virtual environment folder is, bin.activate. Some scripts are being run. So here, I need to run source.vnv, because it's the name of my folder, bin and activate. So notice if I did this successfully, you should see the virtual environment somewhere in your prompt. So notice my prompt is prepended with .vnv. That means I'm in my virtual environment bubble for this terminal. Any questions about our first two steps? Again, this is just something we should get accustomed to. You don't technically have to do this to get a Django project up and running. I want to be clear about that, but this is good best practices to create a virtual environment for each of your Django projects, just so you know what version you have. Andrew Tran?
The dot hides the folder.
Yeah, on Mac systems, dot folders are hidden folders, I think, by default. So I guess if that's not what you expect, you can avoid the dot. But yes, dot folders, again, are hidden folders on Mac, as far as I understand it. I'm not the most Mac efficient person. Was there another hand raised? Rob Works.
Yeah, Ankur, could you go over, is it best practice to make one folder where all your virtual environments are stored, and then for each project you're storing like a folder inside that folder? Is that what you're saying?
So I think Raphael went through a slightly different method yesterday. So there might be, again, dealer's choice in that case. I think the method Raphael went with was he has one folder on his computer that stores every single virtual environment he creates, and then he'll use them. That's one way to go about it. Honestly, the reason I don't go about that is, I guess, a couple of reasons. I'm just accustomed to doing this. And two, my computer actually does not have a lot of space on it. I have like a 128 gigabyte hard drive. These virtual environments are not like a drop in the bucket. They can get kind of sizable. They're similar to like the node modules folders. Sorry, there's a siren going off. Yeah, so again, I don't want to keep these around. So if I delete my project, I want my virtual environment to be deleted also. I don't want to have to like find it elsewhere on my machine. But yeah, so this is typically how you'll see it. Most of our challenges will just say create a local virtual environment folder. If you're interested in doing it the way Raphael did it, again, not necessarily wrong, it's just a different approach to it. But I would recommend this just because, again, my virtual environment's within my project. I know where it is, and I know where to delete it to get space on my computer back. Cool, good question. Any other questions? Okay, so again, these are kind of like the preliminary steps just to create that virtual environment.
I have a question actually.
Go for it, Porfi.
Real quick, just can I see that VS Code is automatically putting like a Python logo next to the venv folder?
Yep.
Is it like a special kind of folder or something?
No, I think it's because I have an extension installed. Let me get icons. So again, there's a bunch of extensions. I think I have VS Code icons installed. I bet that's doing it. It just identifies that it knows it has Python in it, so it's going to put a special icon on it. Yeah, if you install VS Code -icons extension, you get some nice icons in your Explorer tree.
Gotcha.
Cool. All right, so these are our preliminary steps. The real Django stuff starts where we install Django in our BNB. So to do this, we need to run another terminal command, pip install Django. So again, pip is that package manager for Python. It's essentially NPM for JavaScript. So NPM is for JavaScript, pip is for Python. We're installing a package, so we do pip install Django, and it's gonna install that for us. So let me clear my terminal. We're gonna do pip install Django. All right, so we're telling it to install the Django library. It's gonna know where to look on the web. It's gonna download a bunch of files. There's some additional dependencies that Django requires, so we're installing those as well. All right, so that should have installed it. If you take a peek in your BNB folder, again, normally you don't have to worry about what's in your BNB folder, but I'm just kind of showing you, if you go into your BNB folder, go into libraries, notice that Django should have now been installed. So these are all the libraries for Django that have been downloaded to your computer into your virtual environment. So again, these kind of can get sizable, which is why I usually delete my virtual environments once I'm done with them. But this is what you kind of download into your virtual environment. All right, optional steps here, but I'm just going to list it because usually good practice. Create requirements.txt. This is another terminal command. We want to do a pip freeze, angle bracket, and then the name of our file. All right, so what this is going to do is basically use the pip module. It's going to collect all of the current libraries that are in our virtual environments, and it's going to output them. That's what the angle bracket does, to a new file called requirements.txt. Now, again, this is a naming convention. You could name that text file whatever you want, but requirements.txt is kind of the standard that I've seen. So there's no reason for me to deviate from the standard, so I'm not going to. So I'm just going to run this command. Again, this is optional, so optional, but recommended. This is not going to affect our project in any manner right now. All right, so if you take a look at our requirements.txt, it's going to show you the libraries that this virtual environment is using. Notice I installed Django, but Django depends on something else called ASGIREF and SQL parse. So these three libraries were downloaded, and these are the exact versions that my project's going to use. And just to reiterate, in the future, let's say a year from now, Django comes out with release 5.0. Well, that might break my project if I do a pip install Django. It's going to get the latest version of Django. That's what we did in a step above, right? This command is always going to get the latest version of Django. If we already have a requirements.txt, we should use that to install. So if we're going to do that, I would write pip install tac-r and then requirements.txt. This will tell it to look in this file and install these specific versions, not the latest versions necessarily. Again, it might sound like, well, I always want the latest and greatest. That's not always true. Again, because new versions can break old version compatibility. And usually you want your projects to work all the time. Again, you can upgrade them yourself, but you don't want to have developers kind of messing around with that themselves. All right, but we're not going to install anything from requirements.txt, so that was just a segue. All right, so we created requirements.txt, optional but recommended. Let's continue on with our list here. What's next? So we create our requirements.txt. Let's actually create our Django project. So create new Django project. And again, we're still in our terminal. A lot of stuff to do in our terminal. We're gonna run a command. So now that we have Django installed, we can use this command in our virtual environment. So the command for that is Django -admin start project, name of the project. So I think on our curriculum page, we call our project My Site. So we'll just go with that. And then optionally, you can put a period here. So I'm going to do this both ways just to show you what each of those do. So first, I'm not going to have a period there. I'm going to copy this command and run that in my terminal. So Django -admin start project My Sites. I think that's the correct command. There we go. All right, so running this, notice this created a new folder in my directory called My Site. If I open that up, notice there's another folder called My Site and an important file called manage.py. Now this nested folder happened because I did not provide that period after naming my project. This is something I dislike. I hate having nested folders, especially when I have two folders named the same and they're nested. I'm not a fan of that. I'd rather just kind of have a flatter structure. So I almost always put this period in here. So that's going to change kind of the file structure here. So I'm going to delete that folder I just created from the command. I'm going to rerun this command, but now with that period here, and that's going to create a non-nested folder. And that's what I prefer. Again, dealer's choice. If you prefer nested folders, no one's going to stop you. So if I run that command with the period here, notice I no longer have nested folders. I have exactly what I want in my site. My manage.py is on my root level. And that's preferable because we're going to use manage.py pretty much for everything from Django from here on out. All right, we went through a few more steps. Any questions? Did anyone have any trouble or any issues running these commands? Okay, so we created our project. Next step is create new Django app. I don't think we went over apps yesterday too much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to create an app. So the way this works is you have a parent project, and then you might have one or more apps that kind of have a core functionality. So if you think about like Amazon as being like a project, within Amazon, you might have, core smaller apps like maybe a marketplace, maybe Amazon Prime Video might be a different app. Maybe a payment processor might be a different app within your larger Amazon project. So these are what apps are meant for. Honestly speaking, for our curriculum, we're going to be mostly creating one app per project. But again, I want to be clear that you can have multiple apps for a single Django project, especially when you get into like more elaborate projects. Probably want to break up functionality into different apps. I saw a hand raised there. I think it was, Sanjaya.
So yesterday when I created the Django project, I have all the files except the manage.py. Yeah, except that file was missing. I don't know why, but I had the other files for that.
Yeah, that is very strange. We definitely need the manage.py file. So I don't know if it got accidentally deleted or maybe placed in a different directory. But yeah, if you run this command, it should create manage.py on the root level and then a folder for your project. I have not encountered a case where manage.py doesn't show up. If anyone else has, maybe a quick Google, maybe someone else has ran into that. But yeah, sorry, I'm not familiar with that particular area. Daniel Hutchinson?
What's the difference between using Django-M to make a project and Django admin?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat that? So what's the difference between Django admin and?
Because yesterday we were using like Django -M to make a project.
Yeah, I think Raphael might have done Python-M Django. That's kind of loading the Django module. Again, it's just two different ways to do the same thing. This is the way I've seen more often. So that's the way I'm going to introduce it. And again, I think a lot of our challenges will kind of guide you through this also. But I don't think there should be any difference. It's going to do the same thing in creating a project here. Apologies for giving you like varied ways to do this. I guess we should be consistent about it, but I'm going to recommend going this way because that's what I've seen on docs and elsewhere. But it's the same thing to answer your question. Sorry for any confusion there. But all right, let's continue on. So we want to create an app. Sanjay, did you still have a question? All right, so to create an app, now we're going to start using that manage.py file. So to run that, we're going to do Python-M manage.py, and then whatever command we want. So in this case, start app. And this, I'm not pulling this out of my hat, right? This is reading documentation. So if you're ever unsure, Django has pretty good documentation that should guide you through all these steps. But there's a start app command, and that's going to create an app. I'm going to create a new app. Let's call it polls_app. Again, this is where I'm kind of going to deviate. I like knowing which my app folder is. I usually name my project folders with _proj because it gets kind of confusing sometimes. You don't know which one's the project folder or the app folder. So I'm going to name this polls_app. Again, I think our curriculum page says polls. Hopefully we won't be confused by that. All right, so I know we're taking a lot of times on these steps, but want to make sure we're good with creating a Django project. So I'm going to run this command. So Python-M manage.py start app, and the name of my app. So let's run that. Oops.
I think you don't need the -M.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Raphael. Yeah, so -M, don't need that. That's for modules. This is not a module. So we need to take away that -M. Okay, so notice it created this polls app folder. This is my app folder. So whenever I'm referring to app folder, I'm going to be referring to my polls app folder. Whenever I mention project folder, that's going to be my site, the folder called my site. All right, so we got our project folder and app folder. So a few more steps here, not too many more. Now we need to register our app within our project settings .py file. So if you look in your project folder, there should be a settings.py file that already got created for you. We need to add a section here, or add on to a section. So if I open up the settings file, again, a bunch of settings here. You don't need to worry about most of them right now. But the one that we do care about is this installed apps section. It's near the top, right? I didn't scroll too much. We want to just tell Django which app or apps, again, we might have multiple apps, are going to be part of this project. So in this case, I named my app polls_app. So whatever the name of your app folder is, that you must match that exactly. So if you name your project or your app polls, make sure your naming is consistent. Okay, so I want to add that into this list. This comma is optional, but it's good practice just because if I add more, if I forget this comma, I'm going to get an error. So that's usually why you see always a comma at the very end of the list also. All right, cool. So now I've registered my app with my project. That was step, I think, 7, a lot of steps here. So let's put in some code here. Look for installed apps. I'm just going to copy and paste because I don't want to type all this out. Installed apps. You'll have a bunch of apps already, kind of the default Django apps. We don't, again, need to modify those. I'm just going to put ... to imply their stuff there. But whatever our app name was, let's say your app. All right, so ... implies our stuff above this, but here we just want to add our app name. All right, cool. All right, a couple more steps. So we should be good to go. I know this isn't the most fun thing, but good practice kind of get all these steps down. Because again, we're going to repeat these steps over and over. It should become second nature to you guys eventually. Next thing I want to do is, let's see, we register our apps. We could fire up our server. So I'm going to put this as step 9. I know I'm missing step 8, but let's just say start our Django server. So to do that, we're going to run a command on our terminal. It's going to be python manage.py. Again, everything we do from here on out, it's going to be python manage.py. That's kind of our main entry point into our Django app. So manage.py, the command for starting a server is start server, or run server, sorry. Run server. So this will launch our server. The default port is 8000. You can control it. If you want a different port, you can put port 8888 here if you don't want 8000. But the default port is always going to be 8000, at least for Macs. I'm not sure if Windows treats that differently. But if I run this command, this should launch my server, hoping I got everything wired up correctly. If I miss a step, my terminal should tell me that there's some error and I need to go fix that. But let's see if this works. Hit enter. All right, so this did work. If you see a message that says starting development server at whatever location, that means your server was successfully launched. But I bet most of you guys are kind of wondering about, well, there's a scary red text here saying, hey, you have some unapplied migrations. We don't really need to worry about this, but again, I don't like seeing warnings, especially when it's red. That's kind of intimidating. So without really fully knowing what we're doing here, you can, step 8, I'm going to say is run migrations, optional for now. We're going to need to do this when we get into databases, but right now, just the short of it is, again, we don't need to worry about it too much, but Django has some data that it wants to put somewhere so that it could, if it needs to use it, it has access to it in our database. Again, I'm going to kind of short circuit that because we don't need to worry about it. But the command for this is python manage.py migrate. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this will clear this warning from our terminal. And again, I feel safer without having warnings. So to bring down my server, I'm going to run Control-C as directed. Again, on Windows might be a little different. That will take down my server. I'm going to run that command, python manage.py migrate. You're going to see if it runs correctly, you'll see kind of a list of stuff that it does. So I hit enter. You'll see that Django has some stuff it wanted to do, and that's what we allowed it to do. Now, if you run server, so run server. Now, that since we migrated what Django wanted us to migrate, we're no longer going to see that warning. So again, step 8, optional for now, but get in the habit of doing this because we're going to need to always do this once we get into using databases. Okay, that was a lot of steps. Again, I recommend taking notes. Again, if you want to memorize it, that's cool. But I like, especially early on, kind of seeing all the steps I need to go through. And here we have 9 steps that we need to always do to get our project going. So we create a virtual environment, we install Django, we created a project, we created an app, we registered that app, we did a few other things and ran our server. So assuming everything went correctly, we should be able to bring up a window. Let me bring up a Chrome window. Sorry for all the switching. Here's my Chrome window. Let's toss that over here. If everything went correctly, again, the default port, as I mentioned, is 8,000. So if you go to localhost 8,000, that should bring you up to a page like this. If you get to this rocket taking off page, that means you've done everything correctly. Django, your Django project is ready to go. If you did not get here, again, make sure you verify the steps we went through, but everyone should be able to get to here. And this is just, again, the default landing page for Django. This is saying, hey, everything's wired up correctly. Our project is good to take off. Any questions? Andrew Tran.
If you close the terminal, does it close the server? Because yesterday I kept getting the issue where I don't know, maybe I reopened up something and it kept saying like the server is already being hosted at this thing, but I couldn't like go on it.
I believe if you close it, I mean, we can test it out, but from my understanding, if you close this terminal, yes, it will kill the server. Let's actually test it out. Like I know if you trash it, it for sure will kill it. If you exit out, I think it might stay alive actually. Let's find out. So refresh. Yeah, our server's still running. So if you X out the terminal, so I'm gonna bring it back up. Yeah, my terminal is still running. So Xing it out, just saying hide it. If you actually trash it, that will kill it. So make sure you pay attention to what you're doing in case you don't want to have accidental servers running there. But yeah, that's a good point. You can't have 2 servers running at the same port. So let's say I had 2 different Django projects. I can't launch both servers at port 8,000. Your computer's gonna be like, hey, that port is in use. Try something else. So in this case, let's just do this for fun. I want to Control C to kill it. So run server, default port is 8,000. What if I don't want 8,000? What if I want port 8888? You just type in the port number you desire, hit enter. Notice now it's telling me the development server is running at localhost 8888. So if I want to get there, if I refresh my page now at port 8,000, there's nothing here. I think it's cached. Yeah, sorry, this is not what should be happening. There's nothing here. So if I go to like 8001, for example, there's nothing here. There's nowhere to connect to because 8001 has no web server running. But in this case, I picked 8888. So there's my Django project now. Amy Thomas.
Hi, I was just wondering, I was a little confused about what steps do we need to redo if we leave and then come back to work on the project?
Yeah, if we leave our project, let's say I close on my VS Code and then come back to it tomorrow or whenever, the only step you need to do is get back into your virtual environment. I'll let you know that VS Code sometimes automatically will do this for you. Like you might get a prompt saying, hey, we detected a virtual environment. Do you want to automatically load it? But if you don't, just make sure you always get into your virtual environment so that you can do the rest. So if I was coming back tomorrow, only thing I would do is make sure I'm in my virtual environment. I don't need to recreate it. And then I would need to relaunch my server if I were to connect to a web page. The rest of this, again, all this stuff is a one-time deal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. All right, so okay, we're finally ready to start our project. I know that took a long time. We're not going to spend that much time each day, but kind of get familiar with these steps. Make sure you understand high level what they're doing so that we can get our projects up and running here. All right, any other questions up until this point? Okay, let's actually get to the fun stuff. So this is not fun, I'll admit that, but let's actually get to developing. So our curriculum page, again, has a bunch of stuff on it. We went through a lot of this stuff. Projects and apps, we talked about that. Again, I named my app polls_app. Just pay attention to any naming changes I may sneak in there. Let's actually start copying some code. But before that, let's get kind of a high level understanding of what Django is offering us. So I've created this example. I'm going to preface this by saying this isn't the best analogy, so please bear with me here. But I created this kind of made up example here. Let's say we're ordering food delivery. Anyone order takeout yesterday? Anyone get delivery yesterday? I'm just curious. Bet someone has. No one? All right. Anyway, so if we were to place an order, we would be the customer here. So this orange box. I would request an order. So I'd probably be looking at some menus saying, hey, maybe I want to get some dessert, maybe I want to get like entree or get something really specific from a restaurant. Again, this isn't the best example. So kind of take this all with a grain of salt. But let's say I'm looking at a menu, and based on what type of dish I want, that's going to route me to some chef, like specialized chef. So like a fancy restaurant is going to have a pastry chef, maybe like a poultry chef, pasta chef. I don't know how many different types of chefs there are out there, but there's probably a bunch. Let's say I want to order a pasta dish. I look at the menu and say, hey, I want to get a pasta dish. I'm going to be routed to that chef. Again, I don't usually get to talk to chefs in real life, but that chef is going to get a notification that, you know, some dish was being ordered. So let's say pasta primavera. The pasta chef will say, all right, I'm going to handle that. And then this chef is kind of in charge of pretty much the main functionality. He might work with the kitchen staff. The kitchen staff might be the one to prep items, get ingredients from your kitchen. So I have kitchen over here, but they're going to prepare some ingredients, kind of gather them up and kind of get them into a ready state to the chef. So the chef should be ready to kind of work with it and kind of get it to the deliverer. So again, this isn't a real restaurant. Usually the chef isn't handing off to your delivery driver, but just hopefully we can kind of take this as it is. So your chef is kind of your central nucleus for these operations. Once everything is ready, the chef will package up the food. So they, cook the food, and then, food's nice and ready, but you got to put in some containers or, like a bag to deliver it. So they'll package it up, hand it off to your deliverer, and your deliverer will deliver the items back to you. This is, again, ordering food delivery. Now, why am I going through this example? Just kind of understanding some of the mechanics here. Again, this isn't the best analogy, but I just want to give some maybe more relatable example of some process that we might be familiar with, where we request something, some processing happens, there's some behind the scenes work that we don't really care about. We get, that item, the stuff that we wanted gets packaged up and then eventually delivered back to us in some manner. All right, so we're going to take this example, and then we're going to get introduced to Django. So this is what the Django model looks like. It isn't a complete picture, but this is pretty much the main things that you need to know about the Django operations. All right, so client end user, that's like your web page making a request. So, if I'm going to localhost 8000, that's a client request that's being made. And that's going to be handled by urls.py. So these are some files names you might have seen, or, we talked about yesterday. If you kind of peek around in your project folders, like you'll see URLs. In your app folder, you'll see models, you'll see views. These are the files I'm talking about. So in your app folder, you usually will have a urls.py. We'll get to that in a second. But again, models.py, views.py, these are your main files that you should know, and we're going to be working with them quite often. So the flow of this is client makes a request. urls.py is like the router. It's like, what page are you trying to get to? Okay, you're trying to get to this page. I'll kind of direct your request to the appropriate view handler. So views.py is your central nucleus, effectively. It's doing the bulk of the work for you. It's basically collecting like a request. It's going to process the request. It's going to get relevant data for it, do whatever work we need to do. That's all done in views.py with our Django design. Eventually, once we're ready to show something to our user, we'll render our templates, and the template will eventually be sent, will be an HTML page sent back to the user. So if I, again, go to localhost 8000, URL said, okay, you're trying to go to this one place, views be like, all right, cool, I know what you need to see. I'm going to display something to you, and the templates will be rendered to your browser. All right, so urls.py contains your routing information. Views.py contains your core logic of handling a request and giving a response. Your templates are just kind of the visual presentation of what you're trying to show the user, right? So that's like the web page that you're going to show. It has nothing, it doesn't really do any processing of the data. That the data processing is done by views.py. The additional piece here is models.py and your database. For now, we are not going to worry about models.py and database. I do want to give you the whole picture. This is what essentially a Django project is going to be interacting with. Models.py is very important, and a database, because that's where we want to store our data eventually. But we have not talked about databases. So for now, we're going to be left without models.py and database. We're going to be using maybe a dictionary or maybe a CSV files, things that we're familiar with that can store data. All right, so the highlights of this are urls.py, views.py, and our templates. And then eventually we'll be talking about models.py soon enough. Any questions about the flow here or anything I mentioned? Want to make sure we have a good understanding of what the kind of the diagram, high level diagram of Django looks like. Okay, I'm going to take that as we kind of understand the flow of everything here. Let's get back to our project now. So we're going to reference our curriculum page a lot because we have a lot of good stuff there. So we're going to work with our views.py. Again, that's like our central nucleus that does most of the kind of combining of requests, responses, and database stuff. Views.py is that central piece there. So we're going to copy this code just to kind of expedite it and make sure we understand any code we're copying, make sure we understand what it's doing. So first, views.py. I'm going to go to my app folder, and a views.py should already exist here. So if I double click that, should bring out views.py. Nothing really interesting here. We have one import, which we're going to use. Nothing else. I'm going to paste the code that I just copied. All right, so we have from Django shortcuts, we're importing something called render. We'll use that in a bit. But we're also including something called HTTP response. I know Raphael worked with this yesterday. For now, this is the easiest way we can just kind of show something to the user on their browser. So this is going to send a response. We get a request in. We're not going to use that request right now. We're just going to send back a response telling them, hey, there's something here for you to see. All right, so this is one piece. We tackled this piece, but we also need routing. So routing is going to allow us to actually, call this method or call this view handler based on a request that the user makes. So that thing, instead of going back and forth, I'm just going to bring it up from here. So now we need our routing logic that goes in urls.py. Now this is a little different, and honestly speaking, I'm not sure why urls.py does not exist for us automatically. So there's two steps for creating URLs. The first, let's just do it in our app folder since we're already there. We want to create a new file called urls.py. All right, so this is a file we need to create. It was not automatically created for us. Obviously, it's going to have nothing in it. I'm going to copy code from our curriculum page, but this is code you should be able to figure out because you'll see it in other places. But this is what our urls.py is going to look like right now. So urls.py is going to be importing our views. So our views.py, this file, is being imported into our URLs because we want to tell our URL handler or routing logic who's going to handle this request. In this case, if we're navigating to this path, we're telling it that views.index is going to handle this request. So that is, again, this view handler that we created, based on whichever route we're going to, that might be called from our routing logic. This name parameter is optional, but I'd say generally recommended. Again, this will work without the name parameter, but we want to have that there. We'll see some of the benefits of using the name parameter here. But again, this is a very simple file right now. This has one path in it to start off. The additional thing we need to do, we created this new file. We need to tell our project that this is one of our routing cores, as in the project should attempt to check in this urls.py if we tell it to. So if I go to my project folder, there should be a urls.py that already exists. Right? I did not create this urls.py. This was automatically created when I created my project folder. However, my app folder does not have a urls.py automatically in there. Why is that the case? I don't know. I kind of wish they automatically created one for us, but hey, that's fine. We create ours. So I go to the project urls.py. Again, there should be a snippet already there. I'm going to get rid of these comments because they're kind of taking up a lot of space. But here, again, this is the default stuff in my project urls.py. We have one path defined. I think Raphael briefly talked about this yesterday. This we'll get to our admin panel, more on that later. But we want to tell our project URLs, hey, search in our app URLs. So we need to connect that wire there. To do that, I'm going to include something called include. This is a function. If I could type it correctly, that'd be better. So this is something we need to include from Django.urls. This is a function we're going to be using. When we add a new path, this path, we could prepend this with anything we want. This is just going to be for our routing. So if I want to have a base URL, I could add this here. So I'm going to call this polls because that's what I want all my routes to be prevented with for my polls app. So here, this is the name I chose. Make sure you have the slash. And then I'm going to use that include function and tell it to look in polls_app, because that is the name of my app. Again, you might have named yours differently. And then .urls. That is the URLs module that we just created. All right, so now when our request comes in, this will be the first URL patterns that get searched. The project URLs gets hit up first. And then within that, we're going to say, hey, you can also look in our polls app.urls if you need to kind of handle this request. So we go here, it's going to look for, if we have any route with that's preprinted with polls slash, that's going to know to look in app URLs. And it's going to add on this path. So this path is empty, but if we go to localhost 8000/polls, that's what this path is referring to. That /polls is coming from my project URLs. This is not adding anything onto that. All right, again, I'm running off 8,888, sorry, 8,888. So keep that in mind. Okay, cool. So now that I have my routing and I have my views, I should be good here because I do have, look at my views, I have something that I'm returning. This is kind of the delivery I'm giving back to the user. I know you guys might be wondering, well, what about templates here? What happened to them? Yes, in this case, we don't have to use templates. We will be using templates and you'll see what that kind of achieves for us. Right now, we don't have a delivery driver. We're kind of just like, maybe this is a takeout order. So the customer kind of walks in or something. Again, this analogy breaks down. But right now we're just dealing with URLs and views and sending something back to the user from views. We're not having this middleman templates kind of introduced right now, but we're still delivering something to the user. What we're delivering right now is this HTTP response. So let's kind of see this. If we wired up everything correctly, if I go to, if I refresh right now, this is actually a good thing. It may seem like, oh no, I got an error, something wrong happened, but no, this is fine. When you see this error, Django is saying, all right, you tried to do something. I don't quite know what you're trying to do, but these are your options. It's saying you go to or admin/ or polls/. These are the routes that Django knows about. So it's trying to help you out here. So I want to go to /polls/, because that is that route. Again, empty, everything else. Notice we get to this page. Right, this is the HTTP response that we sent to that particular request that we made to this route. So we said, hey, I want to get whatever's at 888 polls. URLs.py took it in. URL said, okay, cool. I'm going to toss you over to views.index. Views.index said, okay, this is what I'm going to deliver back to the user. And that's the kind of the whole flow that we just went through there. I saw a hand raise. I don't know if that went away, but what questions you guys have about URLs.py or views.py or anything in this process?
I don't really have any questions. I just kind of needed a minute to catch up.
Okay, yeah. I think I was gonna actually suggest a break right now also. So let's take a 11-minute break. It's 10:34. I'll leave my code up and then I'll be here. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm gonna pause. All right, Andrew, you had a question about something.
Yeah, it was just about the way you did views.index. I didn't know that you could invoke functions through dot notation like that.
Yeah, so basically we are importing, I guess, yeah, we want to talk about the importing logic. So here we're importing the entire module. So we're saying from the current directory, that's what this period means, import the entire module. So everything that's going to be in this file, in this case, we only have one function, but if I had like 20 functions here, instead of kind of importing each one of those functions one by one, I'm just saying, give me the whole module and I'll pick off what I want. So yeah, we can use dot notation for module. It's the same thing as when we're importing, right? We do like Django.http. That is looking in a folder called Django, and then probably a file called HTTP. So if we actually try to spy this out, probably not the most exciting thing, but let's go into Django, looking in HTTP. So notice there's an HTTP folder. So we're getting to that, and then we're importing HTTP response, which is probably in response.py, I bet. Yeah, I'm not going to go bother finding it, but yeah. So dot notation for modules is totally valid in how we access items. I don't know if that answered your question really, but
yeah, I've just never seen, I don't think we did it before in this cohort where we like actually called the function through dot notation.
Yeah, it's just basically, again, understand that this is a module and then we are able to access anything in the module because everything's kind of, up for grabs. So as long as we import it, we have access to it. So now if I didn't want to do that Another way to do this would be if I did .views, this is saying current directory .views, only import index. So now I'm saying this specific function, just like we're doing with path, we only have access to that function. So in this case, I'll just say, hey, call index. They'll know what index is referring to because I've imported just that function. But again, we do it. Again, I prefer it this way, I'll be honest. Kind of sneaking one more thing in here, if you guys don't mind. You might see syntax like this. This is very similar to what we're doing before. This is saying, whatever is in the views module, import everything. So you don't have to name each one, each function one by one. This says, give me everything you got. I want to access everything. So that allows me to do this. This is usually the way I go about it. So again, I know there's some variance in how you might see it. I'm just doing it this way because I think a lot of our documentation imports the views module, which is cool. Then we do views.index. Another question comment was, can we talk about the flow again, make sure we understand how this whole process is working. So let's go through that, step through it one more time. So here, the first thing I'm going to do is go to some location. I'm the client, I'm the end user. I have decided I want to make a request to localhost, whatever my port is. So you guys are probably using 8,000. I probably should switch to that too, but and I'm saying I want to go to the route called polls. That is what I'm requesting from my browser. So this is an HTTP request that is going to my server. So here, the client, which is my browser, is sending a HTTP request, and that's going to be processed by urls.py. Our server is going to accept it and say, hey, urls.py, what do we do with this? So we go to our project urls.py, again, my site urls.py. This is the very first thing. Let's get rid of split screen here. That's not what I want. This is our project URLs. This is the first place that your project will look and say, all right, who's going to handle this request? It's going to check the list, check the menu of items and say, all right, what's the appropriate what's the appropriate person? If we go back to our restaurant metaphor, someone's ordering pasta. Who's going to handle it? Is it going to be my admin chef or my pasta chef? Right. So in this case, if we're going to /polls, we're going to say, all right, cool. We have an app here where you can look into more URLs. This is just getting into more granular URLs from our polls app .urls module. So now we get rerouted to our urls.py because that's what the request had /polls prepended to it. So now our project knows, all right, our app's going to handle this. So now we're going to search our list of paths in our app.urls and say, who's going to handle this request? In this case, views.index is tasked with it because that is the path that gets matched here. So this pattern got matched because we went to /polls. This part is coming from urls.py in my project. This part got matched in my project URLs. And that tells us, go look in the app for further instructions. So we go to the app URLs and says, all right, if we see a blank, as in anything after /polls, there's nothing here, that's who's going to handle it. So we're going to say, all right, we match this path. This is our view handler to handle it. So this will automatically be called. We don't have to do anything special here. Views.index is going to be the handler for this. We go to views.py. This is our chef kind of saying, all right, you made a request. I'm going to give you a response back. So this is sent back to our browser, and then our browser processes this, whatever it wants to show us, it'll show us. So normally, I think Brendan had a good question. Normally, we're not going to be sending just HTTP responses back. We're actually going to be sending web pages back to this client, and the client will see that web page, and your browser will process it. Elin, I know you had the question about kind of all the connections there. Did that answer it? Was there anything unclear about that explanation?
Yes, that really helped. But also to add up question, just to clarify. So is it always going to the project URL first before you go in deeper?
Yep. Yeah, this is your first point of entry. So that's why we need to tell it this additional kind of member to look into. So this is our main urls.py. We're further saying, hey, we have another module that can handle some of these requests. And this is good for organization. So someone else had a question over break about, well, do we always need to create an app? Can we just, I think yesterday we just created a project folder and no apps. I'm just going to effectively say, yes, you're going to always want to create apps because this is where your core logic is going to sit. Your project folder is kind of like the high level server functionality. Your apps is the core logic for what you're trying to do here. So yes, we're going to always create an app for our needs. Okay, any other questions before we move on here? I want to make sure everyone is up to speed.
Yes, sir. I don't know if I did something wrong. Did you manually create the URLs .py in the app? Because when
Yep,
I created
yep.
my app, it didn't create it. So I have to manually do that one each time, right?
Yep, good question. Again, it's kind of strange with Django. I would expect it to have it there, but yes, we need to manually create URLs.py. That is a step that we're going to pretty much do for every project we create. We're going to manually create this. And when I think of that, I'm like, well, why doesn't Django do this if we have to do this? This is kind of just the convention. We create a URLs.py and handle additional routing here. Again, we could probably get by without it, but this is better design. It's more proper design. This is what Django docs would recommend too.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. So manually create this and then add in our URL patterns. In this case, this is the code I copied over from the curriculum page. Nothing too exciting, but these are the additional paths that we're going to add. Okay, let's continue on. We do have a fair amount to get to. All right, so nothing too interesting right now, right? Like, wow, we got a page that says something to us. Nothing too cool. Let's actually add some functionality, get some interactivity eventually for our application here. So again, I'm just going to expedite this process. I'm going to copy additional routes that we're going to create eventually. So this is the one route we have, but again, we can have many route handlers. So here, again, copied straight from the curriculum page, if you're trying to follow along. This was the path we had before, where views.index is going to handle, the empty path. But if we specify additional specific patterns, that could be handled by different view handlers. In this case, we're going to probably create a detail view handler, a results view handler, and a vote view handler. These are things that we have not created yet, but notice the format for these URLs. We're actually using a variable. So these are going to be kind of like regular expression paths, where like if we put any integer /results, this pattern is going to be matched, and we know that views.results should be the appropriate handler or function to handle this request. All right, so we added a few routes, but we need to add these corresponding views. So let's go to our views.py and kind of copy over. Again, this is kind of just our starter code, so I'm just going to copy it. Nothing, if anything, if there's any confusion about what we copied and pasted, please ask. But this is what we have just as a starter code. We have each method that our routes are going to call. So we have that detail view, right? Because URLs, this path is going to call views.detail. So we need to have some view handler, else we'll get an error if this does not exist. So we have a detail view that's going to give some response back. We're going to have a results view and a vote view. So it looks like we have 4 view handlers right now. Right now, we're just sending a simple text message back, nothing too exciting. But let's actually make sure these routes actually work. So I'm going to look at my URLs.py. Again, if we go to the base path, we should get to index, that's what we're looking at right here. If we go to /integer, we see a detail view. So if I go to /5, as the example was. All right, you're looking at question 5. Important thing here, whatever I put into my URL is what's being reflected in my response. How is that happening? Like if I go to view 77, excuse me, notice it says now you're looking at question 77. How is that happening? How is it what I'm requesting? How is that being kind of converted into my response? That is being done again by our routing. So here, this is a variable that's trying to capture whatever you write into it. So we're saying look for an integer, and we're going to store that in a variable called question_ID. This is a naming thing. Again, we can name this variable whatever we want. But when we get to views detail, this route handler is going to send the request as always, but additionally, we'll send this parameter to our detail view handler. So if I go to views.detail, notice that we're taking in 2 items here. Our homepage is just taking a request. There's no parameters that we expect, but our route for detail is going to specifically look for a question ID value and going to supply that to us. That is not optional. It's going to send that every time to our detail view. So notice we taken that parameter, and through string interpolation, we're able to say, hey, you're looking at this particular question ID. It looks like we're doing something that's very similar for results and votes, where we have a question ID as part of the URL, part of the route, so that we can pick that out of the URL request and then kind of use that information however we need to. In this case, we're just reflecting it back to the user, but we'll see how we can use that a little bit for other purposes shortly. I saw a hand raised there. I kind of missed who it was. Jesse.
Yes. Do you always need the request variable in those functions
Yep.
on the views?
Yep,
Okay.
excellent question. This is mandatory. So this is going back to Django has a specific design and methodology. We need to adhere to Django, what Django expects. So Django expects that any view handler we create, it is always going to take requests as the first parameter. I can't tell it, hey, Django, what if I want requests to be second? This is not going to work. Django is going to send it as the first parameter each and always. So this is not going to work as I expected. But good question. Yes, every view handler must have a request, even if you're not going to use it. Because again, the difference between JavaScript and Python, parameters must be honored. JavaScript is more flexible. Like, hey, you didn't send me something, you send me something extra. I don't care. I'm JavaScript. I don't have time for this. Python is more secure in that if you don't call it appropriately, it's going to yell at you and say, hey, you forgot a parameter, you sent an extra parameter. Both cases will be an error. Thank you for that question. Yes. So request, we're going to start using it. It's not just some empty value that doesn't do anything for us, but we will see it. All right. So this is, again, we wired up our URLs to our views, and our views are sending back something to our user. Let's actually get to something more real here. Again, we're not really doing much, but this is where we're going to start showing some more useful data and get some interaction going here. So again, just going on the curriculum page. Again, I know this isn't the best when we're kind of just drop some code in. I'm just gonna follow directions on the curriculum page. I might organize this different later on, but I just copy and pasted this data from our curriculum page. This is hard-coded data. The reason we're doing this is to simulate data we would get from a database. All right, so just take this for now. We don't have databases right now, so we're not going to talk about databases. But we're going to read in some data from somewhere, either a database, CSV file, somewhere, and store that in our application. So just to simulate that right now, we're going to create this array called latest question list, and we're going to store some data information or some information that we're going to use for our purposes. So we're creating a polls app, just kind of high level. Maybe we should have talked about this earlier. Basically, we're going to ask some questions to a user. The user should be able to kind of select an answer. We want to record that answer in our data so that we could kind of show it and kind of keep track of what people are voting on. So in this case, we have a question. So this question has an ID. IDs are very important to have. Again, databases, once we get talking about that, IDs are kind of the key to look up items. So this question 1 has a question of what's up. Maybe put a question mark there. We have a date. We may or may not care about that. But now we have choices that we offer the user. So in response, to this question, they could say, not much is 1. Notice that the ID for this is 1. Or they can respond with the sky. So they have 2 options to answer this question, it looks like. We also have a second question is what's new? Let's make that a question. Oop, can't have that. What's new? And then not much or the sky. So again, we can tinker with this data. Again, this is very simplified, just to kind of have something, but you guys can add, more fun questions and more fun responses. But this is the structure. Again, we have a list. Each entry in the list is a dictionary. The dictionary has fields, key value pairs, right? Inside of that dictionary, we have a field called choices, which is another nested list dictionary structure. Again, this kind of gets kind of complicated. Honestly, this should be easier to understand when we create classes for them. And your challenge for today actually is going to deal with classes, not dictionaries. Because again, dictionaries aren't the greatest way to store data, but we just did this kind of make sure you understand what structure we're dealing with, as in the depth and the kind of information and the nested information within that. All right, so this is going to be our main data source. Again, this is simulating data we get from a database. I'm dropping that in my views.py. Again, not usually where we store our data, but just kind of go along with this if you don't mind. All right, so now that we have our data, we can actually use that data to kind of show something to our users. So I'm going to take a quick tangent from views and get to our third member of our party, which is creating templates. So this is where HTML comes back. So we learned HTML last week. Again, it's not going to go away. This is the way to show data on the web using HTML. So we're going to create templates, which essentially will look like pure HTML files, but there's a caveat there. There's like an asterisk saying these aren't the actual files or the HTML files that get sent to your user. Django will use our template files and create HTML files for us. Now that seems like a subtlety, but we'll see why I'm kind of making that distinction. But again, I'm just gonna go with our curriculum page just to save some time. But here's the process we need to go with and make sure everyone's paying attention here, because if you miss a step, you might kind of get screwed up later on. In our app folder, we must absolutely create a folder that is exactly named templates. All right. If you capitalize this, if you name it template without an S, this is not going to work the way you want it to. This is again going back to Django. Django is specifically going to look for a folder called templates inside of our app. This is not necessarily a choice we have. I don't want to confuse you guys, but we can make this more flexible. If we wanted to create a different folder name and use that, there are ways to do that through the Django settings, but I'm not going to worry about that. I don't want to confuse you guys. Let's just go with must create a folder called templates. And that's where Django is going to look for our templates. Any questions about that? I want to make sure we're all clear on what I just said. Okay, so again, in our app folder, we create a new folder called templates. Within that, this is kind of dealer's choice. I'm going to go with what I'm used to, and hopefully, all right, I'll actually go with the curriculum page, so I don't want to detract too much. We're going to create a new folder and call it polls. All right, this folder has some flexibility. Again, there's some naming conventions. Usually you might want this to match your app name. I prefer, I usually create like a pages folder. I'll be honest, I usually say pages. These are web pages sort of. But again, this folder name is flexible, but I think the naming convention is match your app name. So I think our curriculum page is polls. I'm going to match my app name because I have a slightly different name. But I just want to make it clear, make sure the naming convention is match your app name. This seems kind of weird. Why do you have a folder with another folder with a nested folder with the same name? Again, it's beyond my knowledge base of why that's the standard. All right, so templates folder, mandatory, must be named that. A nested folder, optional, you can name it what you want, but let's just kind of go with the convention here. All right, so now I'm going to create a new file and call that index.html. All right, so index.html, as you might guess, is going to be pretty much an HTML file, but there's still more going on that might surprise us. So I'm going to create a quick HTML file. Hopefully we're familiar with our HTML syntax enough that you guys won't be blown away. With my standard HTML file, I'm going to delete a few things, change the title to be polls poll homepage. All right, so I have some sections here. Again, nothing too fancy going on here, but I'm going to add in some information, and I'm going to copy the snippet from the curriculum page, just again, so I don't make any typos. I also want to expedite this. Let's take a look at what I just copied and pasted, because there's some stuff to talk about here. Let's get rid of my footer, don't need that, I need a nav. Okay, so I've copied and pasted everything I've highlighted here, but let's make sure we kind of digest this because there is a lot at face value here. We have a header, nothing too crazy there. Again, this is an HTML element. We have, it looks like an unordered list. We have list items. We should be familiar with these elements from HTML. Again, these aren't anything new to Django. These are just HTML elements, which we've seen many times before. All right. I don't like some of this tabbing, but okay. Question is, what's going on here? I'm going to untab this because I don't like the tabbing here. Shift tab. Oops, sorry. How do I? There we go. Okay, so what's going on here? This syntax is something called Jinja syntax. J-I-J-N-A. Sounds like ninja, but it's not. It's Jinja. This is essentially allowing us to use Python directly in our HTML file here. This is kind of wacky. Normally, we're not writing Python. We're not writing any code in our file. If it's any code, usually it's JavaScript, right? But this is Python kind of being snuck into our HTML file here. And this is done through Jinja. This is syntax. You want to look it up. Again, Jinja. There's a lot to learn about it. The syntax is kind of weird. It's not directly just Python syntax. So look up Jinja. Examples, I'm sure you could find good documentation. Primer on Jinja templating sounds like a great source. Looks like I've looked at it before. I don't want to sign in. Will it let me get past this paywall? Okay. Apparently, I need to sign in. That's new to me. There's official Jinja documentation, so that's probably more official. You guys can go through this. I'm not going to bore you with reading documentation, but reading documentation is half the battle. So I'm not going to say you should just kind of know everything offhand. But this is Jinja syntax. The simple things we want to know here is we can write if statements, we could write for loops, which look very similar to Python syntax. So the key thing here is to open kind of a Jinja scope here. We want to use curly bracket and % for if blocks or for blocks. The one additional step, which we do not know how to do in Python, but we need to do in Jinja, is we need to actually tell Jinja where our for loop ends or where our if statement ends, right? Normally, if we're writing Python, like here, like we don't need to say, hey, this if statement's ending, or if we had a for loop, I guess I don't have a for loop, I can find off of that. But in Jinja, you need to be explicit about, hey, this is where my for loop begins, and this is where my for loop ends. So the syntax is end for, one word, or end if, one word. So this is ending this if statement, right? Match them up, kind of like curly braces in JavaScript where they need to match up. We're doing that in Jinja. So this begins my if statement, this ends it. Same thing for my nested for loop. This begins my for loop. This is where my for loop ends. Other syntax you're seeing here is the double curly braces. This is for when you want to show like a variable value. So in this case, I'm showing a value. I'm not doing an if statement or a for loop or a while loop or anything fancy. I'm just showing a value. This is kind of like string interpolation, if you want to think of it that way, where we have a variable and we want to show that in HTML. So we need to use some special syntax to tell whoever's processing this file, hey, this is not actual HTML that you should process. This should be some value that you need to insert here. All right, so that's kind of the high level of Jinja. Again, there's a lot to it. I'm not going to say we're covering it everything today. You can read documentation if you want to learn more about it. But the ins and outs of it is this is allowing us to use Python syntax within our HTML file. Normally, that is not allowed in any normal HTML setting. So let's kind of walk through this and kind of see what this is doing. So we have if statement. It looks like it's querying some value. We'll talk about that in a second. But if this value is not null, or if it exists, then we're going to go into our if statement, which is this block right here. I guess we could tab it to see more easily. But this if statement said create an unordered list and then have a for loop that you execute through. So for each question that's in our data structure here, right? This is a for loop. Create a list item. So this is gonna, again, just like a normal for loop, it's gonna iterate over and over again until it's done. We're gonna create a list item for each question that we have. We're gonna create, show the question text in this manner. So notice how we're accessing that data, question text that's coming from our data structure right here. We have a question and the question text is what we're showing visually there. So again, kind of get familiar with the data structure. That's half the battle of understanding how this works, but we're showing the question text to the user. We're wrapping that with an A tag. So we're creating a link, right? This is going to be a link, and that link is nested within a list items element. All right, so we're going to create a bunch of list items within our unordered list. And then if we don't have any latest question, like if we don't have any data, we're going to show, hey, no polls are available. And then we enter if statement. Again, I know we kind of dissect that a little too deeply, but I want to make sure we understand this is just an if statement for loop. Again, think Python, but having some HTML interacting here too. Any questions about the syntax or what I went over here? Andrew Simpson?
Hey, Ankur, just real quick, this isn't about what you just went over right now, but with the templates folder that you said was necessary. So since like pretty much any Django project is going to consist of like many different apps, is that templates folder necessary in each of the apps contained within the project?
So you do have options. So as we talked about, you might have multiple apps. We're not going to see that much in our curriculum, if at all. I'll be honest. We're going to probably create one app per project. But I think Andrew's question was, well, what if you had multiple apps? Would you need to create a templates folder in each? The short answer is yes. You would create a templates folder in each. The longer answer is you don't have to. You could actually we could create a templates folder out here and call it My Templates. This is a made up folder name that I've created through manipulating the settings here. Again, I'm not going to go through this. I don't want to detour too much, but we could apply a setting that says, hey, also look in the My Templates folder for every template that you might be searching for, instead of creating individual template folders in our app. If we wanted to structure it that way, that is an option we have. That requires more tinkering. Again, that's not the default behavior of Django, but it is possible to add some customization of how you store your files is the longer answer.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, a lot of hands raised. Let's go with Sukhdev.
On the index.html, So the reason we're using Jinja for the Python syntax is because we can't read JavaScript in Django. Is that why? I mean, why are we just not using script tags within HTML?
Great question. So we can still use JavaScript, just like, so last week when when we wrote HTML files and we had JavaScript that kind of did logic for the page, we can still have that. There's a few extra steps, sorry. There's a few extra steps that we need to go with to get JavaScript linked here. We might cover that at the end of this lecture. But the reason we're using Jinja is because we want to use Python, because Django is a Python app. So this is doing logic from our server. We don't have, this isn't a front end processing. This is our back end processing. So our back end's written in Python. That's what Django is written in. So we need to use Jinja in order to use Python here. We can't just use a script tag and use JavaScript as we normally would, because that JavaScript would not have access to our models and our URLs and views and such. But it is possible to use JavaScript. We probably won't do that too much, but it is still an option if your web page requires, JavaScript functionality, like for Bootstrap, or if you want to do anything just on your front end that has no impact from the back end, meaning the server, the database, the views, anything like that. Yeah, JavaScript is a place to do the logic. Jesse.
Just real quick, is it safe to say that the what we learned on JavaScript, the script piece in HTML is the same as the percentage piece that we're putting for Python?
I'm gonna say no, not quite. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but yeah, the script tag behaves a little different. That's parsed by HTML. This is not HTML syntax. This is what Jinja is going to parse this differently than an HTML file. So when I said, again, we're not creating an actual HTML file here. We're creating an HTML template that Django will use to create an HTML file for us. Again, that's that subtlety that I mentioned before. This is not what the end user is going to see. Django will go through this, identify the Jinja syntax, and replace this with legit HTML code as needed. Andrew Trent, do you have a question, or was that hand up from before?
I do have a question.
Go for it.
How is latest question list getting passed through?
Great question. And that helps me transition to my next step. So yeah, great question. So I'm going to update our code. I'm going to write this, though you can copy this from the curriculum page. Andrew had a great question. Well, how is this file? Let's split screen. Maybe they'll help us out here. Split screen here. Index will go on the right. All right. Andrew had a great question. We have this template file. We're telling it that there's going to be some variable here. In this case, we have latest questions list. Where somehow this file needs access to this data. How is that happening? Great question. Let's answer that right now, because that's what our next step is going to be. I'm going to make my code smaller. Hopefully you guys can read it. Can you guys still read this? Hopefully it's not too small. Okay, so now we're going to actually get into more interesting stuff. We don't want to just return some text to the user. We want to return an HTML page to our user. And this is where we start using some more Django items. So I'm going to create a dictionary called data. Again, this is just a variable name. I call this my data. Usually I will call it my data to distinguish. This is a variable I named. Let's call it my data. And then this is going to be a dictionary. This dictionary, you will enter in key value pairs, right? So here I could enter a value of latest question list. This is just a name. I can name this whatever I want to. I could call this stuff if I want to, whatever I want to name it. But in this case, it looks like our guide has named it latest question list. That's fine with me. And the value of this is going to be our actual data. So the first step is create a dictionary, create some key and pass it whatever data you want. Second step is we're going to return render. So if you remember at the very top, I know this data structure is getting in our way here. Can I collapse this? Oh, I can. Cool. We imported this render function automatically. This was already there before we even started anything. This render is used to take our template and create an actual HTML page that's delivered to our user. So render is a function. The first parameter is going to be your request. So this is just what the render function expects. We need to pass it the request that we got. Next, we want to tell it what template should we use to create the response, as in the response page that's sent out. So in this case, I'm going to tell it, well, I have a folder called polls app, and I have a template file called index.html. Where am I kind of making this up from? Well, if you guys remember, I created a templates folder. Wherever folder I created within that, that is the name I'm referring to here. So the reason I don't like doing this for examples is because it's not clear where this name is coming from. So if you guys are fine with this, again, hopefully I'm not going to lose anyone. I'm going to rename my folder here to be pages because that's usually what I prefer. Again, maybe not the most standard way to do this. I think Django says match your app name, but I'm going to call this pages. All right, just to highlight that this folder name is that nested folder name, not your parent app folder, right? So since I have a templates folder, that's standard. I cannot change the name of that. I've created a nested folder called pages. That is what the folder name I'm referring to here. I'm not referring to this app name here. All right, so hopefully you guys can transition with that change. If you don't want to make that change, that's fine. Just understand this is the folder we're looking in, and that's the template file. So first parameter is a request. Second parameter is the template file. Third parameter, which is optional, is the data you want to send it. So third parameter is that dictionary that we created. Now that I've passed this dictionary, my template file is going to know exactly what this is because it's going to look in my dictionary automatically. There's nothing I need to do extra from this point on. Automatically, this dictionary is kind of in the background here. When Jinja gets to latest question list, it's going to look in your dictionary and say, hey, where can I find the actual value for the latest question list? And so say, oh, cool, you have a data structure. Cool, I'm just going to use that, do a for loop over it because it's a list, and get the relevant pieces out of there. What questions do you guys have about all that I just mentioned? Andrew, let's go back to you.
So this always frustrates me a little. So you have like pages / index HTML. Do you actually have to put templates in front of it since it's the pages is inside of templates, but the views is outside of templates?
Yeah, I understand. I can sympathize with your frustration. This is just knowing how Django works. So Django, we do not want to put templates. Django is going to look wherever you tell it here. It's going to automatically look in the templates folder for you. So if we told it templates, it's going to look for a nested templates folder within the templates folder. And yeah, there's no magic way to know this aside from just either reading documentation or being familiar with it. So I know I'm kind of just saying, hey, this is the way it is. But the reason it is the way it is because Django dictates how we operate with it. But yeah, so just keep in mind, do not put the base templates folder. It's whatever nesting you have within that is how you refer to these files. Good question, though. Hopefully the frustration will ease with more practice. I saw another hand. Oh, Jesse, go for it.
Yeah, my question is dealing with how is that particular function index being called?
Could you clarify that? Sorry.
So I'm looking at the, so I'm seeing we defined index request and on index.html, how are these being called with each other as far as I'm going to utilize this particular function or method?
Yeah, so this index is coming from our URLs, right? We said, hey, we go to this route, views that index will handle it. So that's how we get into this function. Now, once we end this function, we're going to do whatever we want to respond to the user. In this case, we're creating a dictionary, and then we're telling it, use our template. We're specifying exactly what template to use here. We're saying index.html is what this render method should call, and we're passing it whatever data that the template file should have access to. So index is going to essentially, it's not really calling index.html, but the render method is going to use the index.html and then use our data and render an actual HTML page for the user.
Okay, so my understanding is basically we just called it up when we imported it in saying index. I see it now. I missed it. All right.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully that's clear. Yeah. Again, so our router, our URLs is going to say, hey, who's handling this? In this case, we say use that index, will handle it. Django will automatically call this function for us when this request comes into this route. So then that's how we get here. Again, we're not calling index ourselves. Django handles this for us once we wire it up. But then we create some data and pass the data as the third parameter to our render method. Again, you guys can read up more on the render method. Django has pretty good documentation, but the three parts of it are the original request, the template file we want to use, and the additional data, if we have any, that's optional, that our template file needs. So given this, if we wired up everything correctly, this file will be converted to a legitimate HTML file and sent to our user. Again, this is not legitimate because we have Jinja in here. That's a browser would not like that necessarily. It might actually ignore it, I'm not sure. But this is going to actually run a for loop, create as many list elements as we want. So if we actually look at this, I'm going to run this by going to the home page. Hopefully everything was wired correctly. If not, we'll debug. Go / polls. All right, there we go. Notice we have our 2 questions listed, what's up and what's new. Apparently I forgot an apostrophe there. But this is that list that got created, right? These are list items. Notice the bullet points here. So we only had 2 questions. That's why this for loop executed twice and created 2 list items. If you actually look at the source, so let's actually go back to our browser. I know I'm switching a lot. I'm going to go to Alt Option I in Chrome. Let's look at our source here. Can I minimize this? All right, I want this. This is what our HTML page has. Notice it has actual list items. This has no Jinja in it. These are the actual list items that got created. So it's an ahref to some location with the text, right? So the Jinja parts got replaced with actual legitimate HTML code. So this is what the end user got sent. This HTML file that had an H1 under a list, 2 list items with an A tag and the text. There's no variables sent in our HTML file. All right, so that's our homepage right here. That's our landing page. We have links that will take us to, depending on which one we click on, it'll take us to poll/1 or poll/2, right? I'm not gonna click on these because if I do, I guess it works. We have some text, but we wanna add on to those pages. Any questions so far? Again, I know we introduced a lot, especially with Jinja. It takes a hot minute to kind of understand how to work with it. Again, the syntax is gonna throw you off. It's not exactly Python syntax, right? We don't need to write N4 in Python, but we need to write that in Jinja. There's a few other things that you'll run into along the way. Be like, hey, this isn't working. The answer is gonna be look up Jinja syntax and documentation, and hopefully that'll get you a long way. Obviously, we'll help you too, but get familiar with reading documentation because there's no way around that. Porfi, question.
Sorry, I was having trouble with mute. So real quick, so when we tell in the HTTP file through the Jinja to go through latest question list, is it getting the name of the data from the name that you're giving to for the key in the dictionary, or is it looking at so whatever we put there is what we need to put here?
Exactly. Yes. This is why I like making it different. I'm just going off the curriculum page, but normally I would say this is like all questions, just to distinguish the name so it's more clear. So if I name the key all questions here, I'd refer to that right here as all questions. That's the variable name, is the key that you give it. The data is going to be the value here. So again, hopefully I won't throw you guys off, but if I choose to name this all questions, then my template file needs to refer to that variable as all questions.
Gotcha. So it's not actually looking at the latest questions list. That's just basically taking it in. Gotcha.
Yeah. This variable is only for views.py. My template file has no access to this variable directly. We're linking it through this dictionary. So we can have multiple values here. So let's just kind of expand here. What if I wanted to say food? This makes no sense in our context, but I'm just gonna put donuts as a value. You can create as many variables as you want. So if I have a variable called food, I can show that for, again, know the syntax, double curly brace, food. Now it's gonna say, don't actually write the word food, look in the dictionary for the value of foods. Again, just like string interpolation, this is a variable. It's going to use our dictionary that we passed right here on line 49. So this template file knows that this value should be donuts. So if I refresh my page, notice again, doesn't make much sense, but 4 donuts got inserted into the actual HTML. It's not, there's no code here. There's no variables here. If I could get to it, this is actual the text that I want. Nothing special about this HTML file on the client side. Okay. Were there any other questions, Yelan?
Thank you. Could you go back to, oh, sorry. Do you mind clarify the double curly braces within the anchor anchor tag?
Yeah, this is, I'm kind of simplifying it. Hopefully it's not too incorrect, but this is essentially string interpolation within Jinja, right? So in Python, to string interpolate, the syntax is put an F before your string and then use single curly brace to get the variable converted to a value, right? That's just the Python syntax. The Jinja syntax is use double curly brace, and then as this is being processed, it's going to say, okay, this portion should be replaced by an actual value, right? The difference is if I just write food here, this is literally the string food, right? So if I save this, I would see all polls for food. It doesn't know that that's a variable because in this case, it's just text. It's saying, all right, you want to show the actual word food? Great, we did that for you. If you want to treat this as a variable, you put double curly braces and now it knows, all right, this isn't literally the word food. It's a variable called food that I have a value for in my dictionary.
So even you're within the path, you are still able to use that double.
Yep. Yeah. Again, this is not, that's the distinction I want to make. This is not HTML code. It looks like HTML code, but it's a little different because this would not be fine in HTML. This needs to be replaced with something that is, some value like 6.
Thank you.
Yep. But yeah, that's, again, it's a weird syntax. I'm not going to lie to you. Still trips me up sometimes. I gotta look up documentation, like how do I actually achieve what I want? But yeah, this will be string interpolated and replaced with the correct value by Django automatically. Andrew Tran.
This might be a Djangoism, but how's it looking into the dictionary normally? That's not regular Python, is it?
Nope, not regular Python. The render method is doing the magic. So there's a lot of magic
Okay.
behind the scenes. I know we say magic a lot, but this is why Django is really great. We don't have to worry about it. This is that encapsulation. We call a method. It's going to do what we want. We don't need to worry about how it does it. Like if you're curious, you could probably dig in deeper and figure out how render actually passes data, how this all done. I'll be honest, I don't know all the magic behind the scenes. I kind of accept it. It does what I want. I know the high level of this is a template, get some data, has access to, and then it works. Like I know that's not the best answer, but that's what the render function is doing for us. Yes. Phil.
Yeah, taking a little step back on the URLs in the polls app.
Yep.
It has 3 variables, the path, and then what function that path is calling, and then it has a name for each one of them. What's the name? I browsed the documentation. I didn't really have a very good answer.
Excellent question. So it's probably the last thing I'm going to go over before we take a short break. Then probably wrap up before lunch. We'll try to not eat into your lunchtime. But okay, so the question is, what is this name value? And we kind of glaze over it. I mentioned it's good to have, but it's optional. Why is this a good thing? So this is a great question. This is a Djangoism using Andrew's terminology here. But so I think we do cover this on our curriculum page. You could probably find some documentation for it, but it's not obvious what this is achieving for us. So a couple things I need to add here to get with our curriculum page, app name. This is a predefined variable that I'm assigning to. I'm going to call that, it's called polls app. That's the name of my app. This will still work without this, but I'm just trying to get in line with our curriculum page. So one, we need to define a variable that exactly is called app name. So must be called app name. That is a Djangoism, but it's optional. I know, kind of confusing guys, but let's just say create an app name variable, assign it whatever name you want, usually the name matching your app. And then you also have a name parameter in your routes. Why is that beneficial? Well, let's go to our index.html and look at our linking right here. Right now, we've kind of hard coded what the path is going to be. We've told it that whenever you click on this link, it's going to go to /polls/some ID. Cool, that's going to work just fine for our needs right now. But the question is, what if a month from now, a year from now, I want to change the signature of this path? What if I want it to be polls/number/question? Let's just say that's what my URL needs to be. If I change this URL, the pattern for this, I need to go through each one of my templates and make sure every path here is appropriately updated. This is not good for maintenance. Like again, this is one template file. Imagine I had 20 template files that had this hard-coded URL. I don't want to go through each template and update that path just because I decided I wanted to change it here, right? We talk about like having a central place for the changes you need to make, and that's where using this name value, sorry, it's kind of wrapping around, becomes beneficial. So again, this is more of a Django thing, but instead of coding it this way, again, I added the /question just to kind of highlight I want to make one change. Instead of doing it this way, there's an alternative syntax that we can use, and this is going to be curly brace %sign here. So this is Jinja syntax. We're going to call a function called URL. Must be called this, the name that we want to be called. And this is where the app name and the name of the route comes into play. So if I call this polls app, that's the app name I gave it here. You might have named it differently. Colon, again, syntax, deal with it. The name of the route. Let's go with detail, this name of this route. Sorry for the word wrapping. The name of this route is called detail. We've told it, we've named it detail. That's our choice. So I'm going to call : detail. and then pass it whatever value you want to pass it. So in this case, it was question.id. This is a better, more flexible way to create your routes within your templates. The reason being, I could change this as much as I want. I could call this donuts/fun/whatever. I only need to change it in this one place. This line will not need to change in this particular case. This will need to change. Again, this isn't foolproof. If I had like a new parameter, like here saying string food, if I choose to add a new parameter, well, all right, my luck kind of ran out here. I need to supply an extra parameter here saying, food, right? Since I have a food variable. So this isn't always, this isn't infinitely flexible, but if I add a new parameter, I need to go through my template files and make sure I supply that parameter. But for the base explanation here, if I modify my route in certain ways, I don't need to go back and modify my linking. This is gonna say, look up the route by the name, and then whatever that route is, kind of go to the view handler that is meant for it. So in this case, it's saying, all right, find this view. All right, cool. I match the name here. Then who's going to handle this? Views.detail is going to handle it. Cool. So views.detail is this function right here. And that's going to get past the question ID that we supplied right here. I know that was a lot to take in, but that is a great question. I'm glad you asked it because we did want to go over that. So again, this is the better way to format URLs. You don't have to do it this way, but this is the more flexible Django specific way to do it, where you do curly brace %, the URL function, in quotes, single quotes here, I guess, name of your app, colon, the name of the route. Again, those names are coming from what you specified in your urls.py, so that's your choice what you name them. They do not have to match this function. I want to be clear, so I can name this homepage. That's going to work the same so long as I refer to the name as home. And then you got to pass it the parameters still, so that's still supplied there. I see more hands raised. Let's answer those questions, and then we'll take a short break. Let's go with Lyman.
I was just curious, maybe before we break for lunch, or maybe even stand down, just like one quick run through of just the flow of things. Maybe just like how the templates and how it gets rendered into the page, and just an overview of the whole flow of the whole process.
Sure. Yeah. Probably good to go through that whole flow again. But just to kind of highlight it. Render is doing a lot of the work for us. So we're saying, hey, take this template, use this data, and then do the rest. Fill in the data however we told you to do it, like with a for loop or using if statements or just showing values. That's what renders do. Render's doing the heavy lifting for us. But render's the one that actually will kind of channel this template file and get it to be what it needs to be before it gets sent to the user. So the return value, we're returning whatever render is returning to us. Andrew.
Continuing Philip's question, so the question.id, why do you have to pass in the parameter? Doesn't that URL already suggest that the parameter is getting passed in?
Nope, because remember the parameter comes from the URL, right? So old way we had it, I wish I had both versions, but let's do a bunch of undos. All right, before we had to specify the parameter this way. Our URL had to show the question ID inside the URL. That's how we grabbed it from urls.py. We said, all right, this is where our variable is going to be. That's how we capture it. We still need to capture it for our view. Our view needs to be sent something called question ID. It needs a value for that. So if we do it this way, the way the flow works is, all right, this is our route. That get matched by, sorry, let me update this. It gets matched by this path. This path will say, okay, let me pick out that variable from the URL. In this case, we send ID 6. It's going to, cool. Question ID is going to be set to value 6. Then we're going to call views.detail, which is over here. Views.detail will be sent the value of 6. With our new way, we still need to do all the stuff. Sorry, I forgot what the redo function is. Edit, redo, Command Shift D. All right, I think I kind of lost myself here, but if we go back to the old way, we can type that easily. We do need to move on in a sec, sorry. So I'm gonna take a break after this. So URL, again, app name was polls app, and then detail, and then we need to tell this function what value are we passing you, and that value is specified here. That's just the syntax of URL. So we say, hey, what's the route name, and what parameters we need to pass it. Again, this is the variable question, has a field called ID from our data set. Again, I know that's a lot to take in, so hopefully we can take some time to digest it. Let's take a quick break. So I know we're running close to lunch. Let's take an 8-minute break. Please be back at 11:45. We do have a few more things to get through, but we'll see how we fare with that. All right, so during the break, I took the liberty of kind of just copying over some additional code from the curriculum page just to kind of get us moving a little quicker. I've added a few few other template files, again, very similar to what I had before. So we were familiar with our index file here, right? HTML file with some Jinja in it. I copied over the detail page, which we're going to talk about in a second. Also copied over results template page, which we'll see used shortly. But yeah, these templates are going to be used by our view handlers. So again, if we go back to views, notice I have some additional code here. So the detail view is going to render the detail template. In this case, I've called it pages, so I should update those. But yeah, so our detail view is now going to render the detail page. So when we call whatever routes this, we're going to get a question from our data structure. So this was our data structure up above. We get a question, and then notice we're just passing a dictionary straight in here. For above example, we create a dictionary first and then pass that dictionary in. We create a dictionary inline here. There's no real difference. In this case, we want one value. Maybe it's fine to create a dictionary inline. I would say it's a little harder to read that way, but nothing wrong with that. So this, again, is getting one of these question objects, right? It's going to grab one of these. In this case, the last one. So the second one, what's new? All right, so that's what our detail view is going to do. Let's take a look at our detail template first. There's a couple, maybe one extra thing here that we need to talk about, but it is important, and probably some of you guys might forget it. That's okay. I forget it half the time. But let's talk about this view. Again, we're using Jinja in certain places. Syntax might take a while to get used to. Showing a bunch of values here. We're passing in a question. So notice this question variable has a parameter ID question text. This is because my views is passing a question object, right? It's passing this entire thing. Let's call it a dictionary because that's what it is. This entire dictionary is the actual value that's passed. So we should have access to an ID field, question text, if we care about the publication date. We should have access to that. Choices is a nested data structure. We should have access to that also. So if we look at our detail template, notice we have a few things going on here. Notice we are looping over question.choices. .choices itself is another data structure. So we are just going through that for loop and doing some things with it. Again, I'm not going to go through all the Jinja specific things here, but you can look them up in your research time. But the thing I want to point out here is, one, we're using a form. We're taking in user input. So we talked about forms briefly in HTML week. This is kind of the standard way to collect user input. So we're going to have a form on this page. The thing I want to point out and emphasize, don't forget to add this line. I forget half the time, I'll admit, and it does not work. And then I wonder why, but usually I'm able to figure out why based on the error message I see. This is a security measure that Django is going to look for. I'm not going to give you too many details on it because, again, I honestly don't know too much about it. I just know that in order to send data to our server in a form, you need this exact line, CSRF token, that's going to get by and allow Django to pass the security check that it's looking for. So let's kind of see this in play. So if we're looking at my URLs again, I want to go to a particular question, and that should be automatically linked from my homepage. Let's see if this works. I might have broken something with my modifications, but that's all right. We could debug if we need to. So refresh just in case. What's up or what's new? Let's go to what's new. So I'm going to click on this. Notice my URL. If you can see at the very bottom, that hyperlink is going to take me to polls/2. It's going to bring it up in a new tab. All right, notice I get no reverse match for polls2. Polls is not a registered namespace. I bet it's because I didn't rename some stuff due to my naming choices. So let's take a look at that. I bet it's in my template. And yeah, so notice here, I'm not using my app name. This is what the curriculum page had. I need to update that. So always make sure anytime you copy and paste code, you adapt it for what you are using. Obviously, that was a poor example there, but I've named my app Polls app. with that app name variable. So I need to go there. So it's gonna reference that link. Let's see if that cleans up. Just kind of go back and forth until we get past this. All right, cool. So that was that one error. Apologies, but we were able to get through that. So again, always read error messages. That's a key trait that you guys should be developing. Don't just freak out if you run into an error message, that's fine. Django is trying to help you and should be pointing you to what's going on. All right, so this is our form right here, the vote button included. So now we can enter an answer here and submit it to via this vote button. What is this vote button going to do? Let's kind of get a quick refresher on forms. So we have a vote button that is this type submit, the value is vote. So this is actually the button. I know normally we see the button attribute, or sorry, the button elements, but in this case, we're using inputs type submit. That's automatically a button for our form. When we submit this form, it's going to be a post action. So notice this attribute that I've just highlighted here. We are sending this request as a post. This is an HTTP request method. Again, we have get, we have post, there's put, there's delete, there's update, there's a whole list of them. Get and post are probably the two most popular. But in this case, instead of sending a get request to a certain location, we're sending a post request. And then this is the location we're going to route to. So notice we're using that relative name. So we're using the vote name. So let's take a look at our URLs. We're going to go to this route right here. Right, because we're looking up by name. If I'm going too quickly, please let me know. But again, we saw this before where we use the URL function, app name colon route name, and then whatever parameters that view handler needs. In this case, it needs the question ID, and we're going to send a post to it. So let's take a look at our view handler that's going to receive this form submission. So go to views.py. I've copied this from the curriculum page. This is what our vote method looks like. So notice we get the question by ID. So the question ID is passed to us. We use that to look up the question in our data structure. So again, normally that'd be data from database. In this case, we've hard coded it into our latest question list. We get the question object out of that list, and then we start populating some information. So in this case, the choice that they selected is based on the ID here. So again, I know this is kind of hard to take in really quickly, but this is basically using that post dictionary. So this is a data dictionary that's sent. Since we send a post request, we have a post dictionary containing values from our form. Again, there's some HTML form knowledge that you guys need, and I'm not sure I'm going to have enough time to cover it, but I'm just going to go over that. Here we have a name. This name matters. The name you give your field, we talked about this in forms before, the name attribute for all of your form inputs, that is what your dictionary on the other side is going to automatically have as the key that looks up. So since I named that field choice on my HTML front end, the dictionary is going to have a field called choice or a key choice, and then a value, which is the user value that was entered in. So that's what this is going to kind of accept. We're going to get some index value, doing some math here, basically figure out what selection they actually chose and convert that to our data value here. Then we're going to increment the vote count for that particular choice. So again, if I selected not much, the vote count for that should be incremented in my data structure. So the vote here, let's see, we're in question what's new. If I say not much, this votes value will be incremented and stored in our data, so that if we vote again and vote for the same option, that vote value should go from 1 to 2 for the next time around. All right, the final thing here is we are going to redirect the user. So they vote. The vote is processed by this method. That post method is processed here. And we tell them, well, we don't have a particular view we want to show you for this vote, but we do have another view we're going to reroute you to, and that's to the results page. So this man is here. There are different ways to do this in Django. This is one way. This is going to redirect us to polls app, that's my app name, results. And this is a route name. The route name would eventually go to this route right here. All right, that was a lot of linking, a lot of wiring, a lot of me talking. I want to pause for you guys if there's any questions. Jesse.
Yeah, why are we using the reverse method in the return HTTP response redirect?
So I think HTTP response redirect requires it won't use a route name. So I need to Google this actually. So sorry for, but yeah. So reading documentation, half the battle, but I don't know exactly what the reverse method does. It does some lookup. So there's Stack Overflow. That could be a good answer. So I think it's going to do I'm going to guess, sorry, I'm not reading this fully, but it's going to look up your route and give you the view that needs to be called. If you go to official Django documentation, reverse Django method, they probably have a better answer. So let's go here, reverse. Should be easy to find.
So this reverse method is totally different than the other reverse methods I've seen and from the other languages.
Yeah, so I was able to find it. Let's see what they say. View name can be a URL pattern or a callable view object. For example, following URL. Essentially, I'm just going to kind of simplify it as what I know. We're going to look up a route name, and it's going to route us to the appropriate view handler. So instead of calling results directly, we're going to say, hey, we want to go to this route, and then pass it the arguments, and it's going to essentially call this function for us. There's a lot of stuff that I glazed over there. Apologies there, but just know that we're trying to redirect and have someone else handle the return for this. In that case, we're going to have results do that for us. Again, I apologize. I know that's not the best answer we can provide at this time, but if we can kind of accept that, let me throw in the new results method. So this was, again, copy and pasted from curriculum page, going to update it for my needs because I have pages in my folder. We get the question. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's see if this all works. Again, kind of did a lot, kind of threw a lot on the screen, but the idea here is we have our detail page. So let's go back to our home page. If I click on what's up, notice that this is question 1, the proper questions posted. If I go back, click on this one, is question 2. How is that happening? Well, it's all about the linking. It's based on the location I'm going to and how we process that link. So let's answer this question. So what's new? Not much. So hit vote. Okay, we got an error. That's fine. Errors are fine. Looks like polls got me again. Notice how informative Django is with their errors. It's going to actually show me the line of code that actually threw that error, which is really helpful, right? I know exactly looking at this, that is not my app name. I've mistyped that. So I need to go to my results.html template. Again, get good at reading these error messages, but it looks like I know exactly what file this is, what line this is. I know how to fix this pretty easily by reading the error message. So there it is. That should be polls app, because that is my app name. All right, cool. That is that. Let me double check. I don't have any vote HTML. I don't think I need that template. Okay, let's see if this works. If not, we'll error handle again. So let's go back to our homepage. Let's go to what's new. Not much. All right, there we go. Notice there's 2 votes here. If we keep voting, yeah, let's vote again. Let's say the sky this time. Vote. All right, 1 vote for the sky. So we are keeping track of our data on our backend. We're able to persist it and show it to our user. And that's the whole point of a server. The server is going to manage the data. So now let's say, since I was talking to Jesse, if this were a live website, he could hit this website if it was on the public internet. I could hit it. These vote data would be shared between us. As in, if if I keep voting for this, Jesse kept voting for that, we will see these, keep updating as we each enter our votes in. Okay, so again, that's a very simple app here. We're not to the point where we're creating new data from the front end. That we will get to eventually once we get into databases and a lot more ahead in Django. But the high level overview, today's focus was working with templates. If you're still kind of iffy on templates, that's fine. Raphael, I believe, is going to go over templates more in detail tomorrow. So there's more to come, more practice, we promise. But again, let's go over just kind of the high level things, takeaways here. Just understand Jinja is a particular syntax that we can use Python like code in our HTML files. And this is very handy with Django, because Django will take our templates and create actual HTML files for our users. Again, just kind of understand the routing that we talked about. This is kind of an important high-level understanding of how Django is working. I like visuals, I like flowcharts. So again, understand the main pieces at play here. URLs.py is your main router. It's like, hey, someone's requesting something, who's going to handle it? That's what URLs.py determines. Views.py is the person, or not the person, but the logic that handles the request based on what route you went to. So we go to /polls, one view is going to handle that. If we go to /polls/ some question, another different view handler is going to handle that. Templates are those HTML template files that we created. That's just for delivering your data. Does not do any processing really. our views kind of says, here's the data, Django, convert our templates to HTML files and send it to our end user. So that's this kind of flow here. Again, the bottom stuff here we will get to, and it's really important. It's a lot more for Django here, but we're going to tie in a database, models.py, very important data modeling. That's a good concept, a good topic to know about. But right now, these guys aren't part of our party. So it's just urls.py, views.py, and templates.py. For your challenge tonight, I kind of have you guys simulate models.py, not super realistically, but just kind of introduce that is a file that exists, and we will be modifying that file. But again, we're not using databases or models really for our challenge tonight. So just a heads up there. I saw a hand raised, but I missed who it was. Sean.
Yeah, so most of the stuff we're gonna be editing is on like the app folder, right? We don't really touch them like the original file, like my site, except like that URLs, just adding in that path, right?
Yep. Yeah. So that's a great summary there. Yeah. So we have two folders. My site is my project folder. Polls.app is my app folder. Majority of my changes and my logic go in here. My site, the only two things I did that I recall, I updated my settings to say, hey, settings, there's a new app in town. And two, yep, our URLs just need to say, hey, there's a new app that you can look into. The rest of this stuff did not touch. This project is not doing much for me right now. But yep, good observation there. Okay, we are hitting lunchtime, but we got one more thing. I know you guys are probably itching to get to lunch, but let's cover one more thing because you guys, this is an optional bonus thing for your challenge tonight, and it's good to know about. It's a little non-intuitive, so we should go over it as a class. So cool. This is my website. Kind of works. I could go. Let's go to question 1. We haven't gotten to question 1. I don't think so. Let's go. Oops. Question 1. What's up? I think the sky is up. Vote. Cool. 1 vote. Let's vote again. Sky again. Cool. Seems like it's working. Obviously, this should not be impacting the results for 1. So if we go to 2, or sorry, to 2. Again, these votes, sky is still at 1 vote. Those are separate responses. Okay, I'll be honest. I don't like the styling, right? I'm really passionate about styling and making things look nice. This doesn't look nice for me. What's a tool or language we could use that kind of jazzes up? So I'll say it together, CSS. All right, cool. So what if I want to use CSS here? Cool, we can still use CSS with our HTML templates, but there's a small caveat. There's a little extra work you need to do to get this to work with Django. So I'm just gonna go over that and then we'll be free for lunch. So I want to use some CSS here. How do I do this? We'll go over this together, but Django has great documentation. So I'm gonna point you guys there also. If I search for Django CSS static, cool. How to manage static files. Example, images, JavaScript. We talked about you can still use JavaScript, CSS. This will kind of walk you through what we're going to go over here, but we'll talk about it and go through an example. So here, a couple steps I need to do. In my app folder, again, I'm going to create a new folder. It's going to be called static. Same rules apply as before with our template folder. It must be named static for it to work out of the box. You can customize it, but let's just stick with the default naming. So I need to create a folder. It must be called static. Here, I'm going to put my quote unquote static files that my HTML templates want to use. So I can put CSS files in here, JavaScript files, images, any other files that only my HTML files care about, not my backend server. In this case, again, I can create nested folders. I'm going to create a CSS folder that's optional. In here, I'm going to create a styles.css file. This is no different than as if we're just creating an HTML web page. So let's create some styling quickly. Let's go with body. I want a new font. I always hate that default font. Let's go with Trebuchet. That's a nice font. Let's change the font color just to make it a little more jazzy. Let's pick a color out of this list. Something that won't burn our eyes. Let's go with midnight blue. It's gonna probably look close enough to black, but it's gonna be kind of bluish. That's cool. Let's get rid of margins or add some margins in. So let's add a nice 20 pixel margin around each side. So we'll get some white space around the side. And then let's do one more thing. Background color. Let's go with a nice aqua. It's not gonna look nice, but whatever. All right, so add some styling in here. Cool. That's just CSS. We hopefully are familiar with how to write some CSS selectors. It's gonna select my body tag. Cool. Question is, how do I get that to work with my pages here? Let's work with index.html. I'm not gonna worry about the rest. All right, normally I would just go up here and go like, cool, I have to link style sheets. So let's do style sheets. And then I think it's href. I made that mistake before. Href, I would think, okay, well, I need to navigate probably up one level because I'm in index here. It's not always clear what level I need to go to. So I might be like, static / CSS, whatever. This is probably not going to work. Let me just test it out before I claim otherwise. But I found my file, which was styles.css. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Let's check it out. Refresh. All right, notice it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, because we didn't follow the Django approved way to get static files into our templates. So the way to do that is we need to, again, this is all in documentation. So if you forget, you can look it up. We need to load static. This is just how you do it. You need to load static, whatever that is. It's loading it in. Then we need to change our href to be formatted using Jinja. And now we need to say we want to look up in static because that's where our items are. And we want to look up CSS / I called it styles.css. And there we go. So again, this looks weird. I understand it's not easy to kind of just know like, why do we got to do it this way? That's just what Django needs is the short of it. So you load static and say, all right, this is how you find the static file. It's going to say, all right, cool. I'm going to look in your static directory. Cool, you have a CSS folder. That's what this is. Similar to how we had a templates folder. We don't specify templates for our views, right? We just say pages / index because I have a pages folder and index in there. Same thing with our static folder. We just reference the nested folder if we have one in the file we want. So I have CSS / styles.css. Let's see if this works. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Refresh. All right, let me take down my server because I know that's been a problem before. Let's try this. I know there's a step I might have missed, but maybe not. All right, so server's back up. No issues. Again, read your terminal. If there are issues, your terminal will tell you about them. Let's try refreshing. Oh, I need to go to my homepage. That's one thing. All right, there we go. We got our cool, wacky colors here. Didn't take too many extra steps, but there's a couple extra steps. So again, if I need to load static and use this weird formatting of Jinja saying static, just the keyword, and then where the file is within that static folder. Let me try doing the other way. I'm curious. I don't think this will work, but since I'm curious, I'm going to quickly check. What if I just went through the relative file path? Will this actually work? So I'm going to go to static and CSS and stuff. Will this work? I don't know. Let's take down my server. So again, just from experience, sometimes you need to take down your server to get these changes to apply. So I took down my server. I'm going to relaunch my server. Okay, it's back up. Cool. Let's refresh. All right, that's still working, but I don't know if that's cached or not. I'm actually curious. Let's apply it to our detail page to see for sure if that works. But this is not the appropriate way to do it. So let's kind of be clear about that. So you can go to my detail page. Last thing I will do, I promise. All right, let's see if this works. If I get the relative file path, I want to see if my detail page will update with the styles. Let's take down my server. Okay, I'm suspect. Oh, that actually worked. So that wasn't a great lesson. But takeaway is don't do it this way. Do it the Django way. If you go through the Django docs, it's going to say, hey, you need to load static and start using that format for it. I guess it looks like you can create relative file paths, which I guess I've never done before because I always follow the Django approved way, but don't do it this way is what I would want to say. It may work, but Django does not really want you to do it this way, especially if things move around, that's not gonna play well. Like if I move my detail page into a nested folder, well, this file path is no longer gonna be correct, right? But if I use the other method, it's gonna know where to look. It's not gonna use a relative file path. Cool. All right. So that is how you load in static data. So static data can be CSS files, as I mentioned, JavaScript. If you want to use JavaScript in your HTML files, you still have the option to just know kind of how to load them in. And the proper way is what I had here before I messed around with this. Again, %, curly brace, %, static keyword. what file you want, and that makes it so now if I move any of my files here, it's not going to care. Okay, what questions you guys have about that home stretch that we went through? I assume it's going to take some time to digest it. Again, Jinja templating, we're going to go more over it tomorrow. So if you're still kind of fuzzy on it, more to come. Your challenge from tonight will give you some practice writing templates. So that definitely make sure you do the challenge tonight. It should be achievable based on what we went through today. But again, if you have any questions, let us know. Sukdev, you have a question.
I think it was just moving really fast. What was that vote.html template used for?
Well, where was this? Sorry, where were we looking?
Right there under pages, vote.html. On the left-hand side on your folder view, you had created that template.
Oh, sorry, this was premature.
Ah,
Sorry,
it's
we are
empty.
not using
Got
it. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
I thought we needed a vote HTML view, but we don't need it because we go back to our views. We are not rendering a page here. We're just saying, hey, someone else handle this, and result is going to be what's gets displayed there. So yeah, this handler does not have a corresponding template. That's fine. We're just saying, hey, someone else is going to render a template for you, and that's going to be this view right here. Again, this reverse method, I know that we kind of went over quickly. Just understand, you can read more about it, but this is saying, hey, this route, whatever this route is, you handle this response for me. I'm not going to do it. Okay. Again, I know there's a lot to take in there. Go through this tutorial. So I'm going to stop the recording